In today's episode, I'll talk about two interesting stories. In the first story of the day, I'll talk about a new report by Peterson Institute which talks about US tariffs and how it could impact the rest of the world. And in the second story of the day, I'll talk about Global Capability Centers or GCCs, and I'll also talk about why there has been a lot of talk about them as of late. Welcome to the Daily Brief Show by Zerodha, where our aim is to cut through the noise and simplify the biggest news and stories in the financial markets in a way that is easy for you to understand, yet detailed enough as compared to traditional news channels. I'm your host Anurag Bansal, and today is Tuesday, the 7th of January. Let's begin with the first story and talk about Peterson Institute's latest report on US tariffs and what it really means for the rest of the world. Imagine you're just about to buy your favorite electronic gadget or a new pair of shoes. And then imagine having to pay a lot more for them than you pay today. Now the thing is, this extra cost may not just be because the product became expensive, but more to do with something called tariff. Now, tariff, to explain it to you very simply, is a tax that a government places on goods that are coming into a country. Now, it is usually meant to encourage people to buy locally made goods instead of imported items. Now, according to a new report from the Peterson Institute, if certain proposed tariffs are introduced, the outcome could be very different from what some of us might expect. Prices for many everyday food items might go up, and American companies could find it very hard to compete on a global level. Now, the situation here currently is that there have been campaign promises about imposing new tariffs on imports. Now, these promises include adding a 10 to 20% tariff on all the goods that come into the United States, plus an even larger 60% tariff on goods that come in from China. Now, the Peterson Institute took these ideas and then analyzed what would happen if they actually become a policy. Now, their findings show that industries, consumers, and international trade relationships could all be affected in many important ways. But first, to understand why exactly these tariffs could become so disruptive in nature, we need to know which products the United States currently even imports. See, a large share of electronics and machinery that is used by American consumers and manufacturers comes from China. In fact, China supplies about 27% of America's electronics imports and 18% of its machinery imports. Until now, many electronic items like smartphones and laptops have not quite been heavily taxed because there aren't even enough countries which can make them in the same large quantities that China can. This has of course meant lower prices for consumers like you and me. But if a 60% tariff is placed on these particular goods, the cost of electronics as a whole could rise very significantly. And it's not just electronics, by the way. China also provides about 75% of America's toys and sports equipment, about 40% of its footwear, and around 25% of its textiles. So these high tariffs in a way could affect everything, from dolls and trainers to t-shirts and sportswear. So as a result, many families might have to now pay more for essentials and everyday items than they ever did before. Now, there's another layer to this problem. Many imports are actually parts which American companies need in order to finish making their products. Now, if these parts become more expensive, it raises the production cost for American manufacturers for obvious reasons. And over time, these higher costs can add up and make American goods a lot more expensive, both at home and abroad. So a tariff that is actually meant to protect jobs in a way could end up hurting American companies and as a result, jobs if it forces them to spend more on components that they require. Now, the Peterson Institute also looked at the idea of placing 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada. Now, these two countries are deeply connected to the United States through manufacturing supply chains. In the auto industry, for example, a single car part might cross borders several times before the car is actually ready for sale eventually. Now, if every crossing is taxed at about 25%, the final price tag for a car could jump quite a bit, as you could imagine. And this could make it very hard for American auto companies to stay competitive both at home and in other markets around the world. Now, with that context in place, let's look a little bit back in time. Economists Klein and Meissner studied the Gilded Age in the United States, which was the period from about 1870 to 1909. Now, during that time, America had high tariffs which averaged around 35%, and some industries faced even more of them. Now, their results show something very surprising. The higher the tariffs an industry had, the less productive its workers tended to be. Now, one explanation for this is that tariffs made it easier for smaller and less efficient companies to hang on because they were shielded from foreign competition in a certain sense. So instead of pushing these companies to work smarter, these tariffs actually allowed them to remain in a protective bubble. And as a result of that, they turned out lower quality products which could not even match European standards. In textiles, for example, tariffs climbed up to 70%. And despite this enormous protection, American companies were still not able to match European producers in terms of quality. The extra taxes just did not spark innovation in a manner of speaking. They only encouraged manufacturers to keep on doing the same old things because there was less pressure to improve. Now, another issue, of course, is that tariffs in that era were often decided based on which groups had the most political influence rather than actually a carefully planned industrial strategy. Now, the Peterson Institute also warns that history could repeat itself this time around if these modern tariff proposals become a reality. Other countries are unlikely to sit back and accept them for obvious reasons, and they might pull their own tariffs on American goods, which could hurt farmers, technology companies, and many other US businesses which depend on selling products to overseas countries. Now, meanwhile, back to the research, industries that do well usually have other strengths going for them, such as natural resources, strong technology, or even access to big domestic markets. Now, during the Gilded Age, which I'm referring to, the industries that succeeded did largely because of these natural advantages, not quite because they were protected by high tariffs. So, all of this means that raising tariffs does not necessarily help the people or companies that it is supposed to protect. Instead, it can actually push prices up for ordinary consumers, increase costs for manufacturers in the long run, weaken a country's ability to compete on a global stage, and a lot more. So if you think about it, it's quite like a classic case of something that might sound like a quick fix, but could end up creating a lot more problems, both for businesses and for everyday families. And that is what the Peterson Institute's report is warning about. By looking at both current trade data and lessons from history, the message is very, very clear. We need to think very, very carefully about whether such tariffs could do more harm than good. So in other words, what actually starts as a plan to protect American industries could actually end up making life a lot more expensive for everyone and also potentially harm the very industries that it plans to save all across the world. With that thought, let's move on to the second story of the day. See, there's been a lot of talk lately about something called the Global Capability Centers or GCCs. Now, if you haven't heard of them yet, think of them as large multinational companies that are setting up special offshore divisions in other countries to handle important tasks. Now, these tasks can range from managing data to carrying out research and development projects or anything in the middle of it. Now, in India, GCCs have become pretty big. Analysts and research firms, including Knight Frank and Deloitte, predict that GCCs could contribute over 100 billion US dollars to India's economy by as early as the year 2030. And this excitement, just by the way, is not coming from thin air. Over time, GCCs have grown from being a low-cost back office into hubs that are now at the forefront of research, technology, and innovation. So now, in order to understand how all of this actually came about, we need to first understand why GCCs were even created in the first place. See, earlier on, many global companies used to outsource simple tasks to India, like data entry or basic customer service, and the reason was to save costs. Now, over time, businesses realized that the talent in India was not just huge in number, but also very highly skilled, especially in fields like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the scope of work slowly started to expand. And today, these centers handle artificial intelligence projects, sophisticated data analytics, and even design new product ideas altogether. Now, because of this shift, India currently holds more than half of the world's GCC operations. Imagine the scale of 1,600 such centers which employ over 1.5 million professionals across Indian cities. Bangalore and Hyderabad are leaders here with a lot of office space dedicated to these particular centers, and it is pretty much enough to show how rapidly this space is growing. By 2025, the number of GCCs might actually cross 1,900 with employment touching over 2 million people. But the question here is, why India out of all places? Look, one big reason, of course, is talent. India has one of the world's largest pools of skilled workers, and every year over 1.5 million students graduate in engineering and other related fields. But another reason over here is that employing staff in India costs much lesser than it does in Western countries, and that continues to attract companies looking for both quality as well as affordability. But even beyond that, the government has actually played a very helpful role through initiatives like Make in India and Digital India, which are largely aimed at encouraging businesses to set up shop over here. Now, some cities have also specialized clusters like Hyderabad's Genome Valley, where pharmaceuticals and healthcare companies can collaborate and share ideas more effectively. Also, if you take a closer look at who exactly is leasing office spaces in these GCCs, you will see that American firms alone occupy more than half of the total amount here. You'll also see that most of the GCCs in India belong to tech, banking, and financial services industries, though newer areas like life sciences and engineering are also catching up pretty quickly now. So put it all together, and you have a story of how a country which is known for offering cost effective solutions has now evolved into a place where some of the most advanced and exciting projects are being carried out. And that is why GCCs in India is a space that is really worth watching out for all of us. They bring vast employment opportunities, they boost innovation, and they also show how quickly an industry can transform when it is given the right conditions. Let's now move on to the final section of the day and talk about the quick news tidbits. First, Foxconn posted a record 64.72 billion US dollars in Q4 2024 revenue. This was driven by robust demand for AI servers from clients like Nvidia, offsetting flat growth in consumer electronics. Its shares surged 76% in 2024, and that was a reflection of a strategic shift towards high-margin AI and cloud solutions. Second, NTPC Renewable Energy Limited won a 1000 megawatt solar project in Uttar Pradesh at a tariff of 2.56 rupee per kilowatt hour. This strengthens its green energy portfolio overall. Now, this competitive pricing also shows the affordability of solar power and also NTPC's role in advancing India's renewable energy goals. Third, India's FMCG sector saw rural demand grow at almost twice the rate of urban in Q3 of FY 2025, with rural sentiment driving 5.7% value growth. However, urban challenges like inflation and high housing costs weigh on margins, with recovery expected in the next 2 to 3 quarters. That's all the news and stories I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode and maybe learned something new from it. As usual, I'll see you in the next episode. This is your host Anurag Bansal signing off. Take care and goodbye. Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.